There comes a point in human awakening when the world no longer looks the same. It's not that reality itself has changed, but rather the eyes that once gazed upon it have been stripped of illusion. The colors that once seemed bright now appear faded. The laughter of others sounds distant, and the noise of the crowd feels almost unbearable. This is the paradox of awakening. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Sigmund Freud once wrote that awareness is a wound. To know oneself deeply is to bleed quietly, because the truth of the psyche does not flatter the ego, it dismantles it. The awakened person carries a new kind of loneliness, one that comes not from lack of company, but from no longer being able to participate in the games that once made sense. You start noticing how people speak without meaning, how they love without knowing, how they suffer without understanding why. You begin to see that much of what moves the world is not reason but repression. Every smile hides a defense, every silence a fear. You recognize in the laughter of a friend the echo of an old pain, in the anger of a stranger, the trembling of a child who was never heard. Freud believed that human beings spend most of their lives trying not to feel. Civilization, he said, is built upon the renunciation of instinct. To live among others, we bury our impulses, our desires, our shame, and our grief. We learn to behave, to please, to be accepted. But the price of this order is our own disconnection from the soul. And then, one day, the repression cracks. It might come as anxiety, depression, insomnia, or a deep sense of meaninglessness. The symptom is the voice of the unconscious asking to be heard. But instead of listening, most people numb it again with distractions, work, relationships, or spirituality disguised as denial. To awaken is to stop running. To awaken is to look at the darkness that lives beneath the surface and dare to recognize it as yours. Freud never spoke of awakening the way mystics do, but his entire work points to the same truth. The path to freedom is through the unconscious. You cannot be free while you are at war with what you repress. When you understand this, the world starts to unravel. You begin to see the subtle ways in which everything is a defense mechanism, how love becomes dependency, how success becomes compensation, how kindness sometimes hides guilt. The awakened eye pierces through the mask, but in doing so loses the comfort that ignorance once gave. If you've ever felt this strange detachment from the world, as if you no longer belong among the noise and superficialities, then you already know what I mean. Awakening is not a victory, it's a loss. You lose the person you thought you were. You lose your illusions of control, your faith in appearances, and your innocence about human nature. Freud called it the loss of narcissism. It's the painful realization that you are not the center of the world, not even the master of your own mind. Most of what you do, feel, and think comes from forces you don't control. Old wounds, early experiences, unconscious desires. Once you see that, you can't go back to pretending, but there is also beauty in this loss. When you stop identifying with the mask, something deeper begins to breathe. Beneath the neurotic noise, there's a silence that was always there, waiting. The silence of truth. The silence of the unconscious becoming conscious. If this resonates with you, if you felt the confusion of seeing too much, the sadness of being awake in a world still asleep, I invite you to stay here with me a little longer. This space is for those who seek not comfort but understanding. If you feel seen in these words, subscribe, not out of habit, but as a way of walking together through this terrain of the soul. No one awakens alone. At about 1/3 of the way into awakening, something strange happens. You start to question whether it was even worth it. You begin to miss the days when you could believe easily, when you could blame others for your pain, when you could find distraction in pleasure or purpose. You miss being asleep. It's normal. Everyone who awakens goes through this morning, because awakening is not enlightenment. It's grief. Grief for the illusions that once kept you safe. Grief for the version of yourself that didn't know yet. Freud might have said that the mourning process of awakening is the psyche adjusting to reality without anesthesia. And in this moment, I want to ask you something. What was the illusion you had to lose to begin seeing? Was it the idea of love, the belief in control, the certainty that someone would save you? Write it in the comments, because naming it is the first step to owning it. You can even copy and paste this phrase if it helps you start. The illusion I had to lose was... When we share our losses, we realize we are not alone in this awakening. Freud often compared the process of analysis to an archaeological excavation. Layer by layer, you uncover what has been buried. At first, the findings seem insignificant, a memory, a dream, a fear. But as you dig deeper, you discover structures, patterns that repeat across years, across relationships. You begin to see how your life has been unconsciously guided by old conflicts. You love to be loved because as a child you felt unseen. You feared rejection because once you were abandoned. You became successful because failure once meant humiliation. Every adult neurosis, Freud believed, is the echo of a childhood wound. To awaken is to meet that child again. Not through memory, but through feeling. You recognize their fear in your hesitation, their shame in your silence, their longing in your obsession with being understood. And when you finally dare to embrace that inner child without judgment, something softens. The cycle of repetition begins to break. Freud called it working through, the slow, patient process of bringing the unconscious into consciousness until the symptom no longer needs to speak through pain. But working through is not glamorous. It's not a sudden enlightenment or a mystical ecstasy. It's sitting with discomfort. It's facing the part of you that manipulates, lies, hides, and sabotages, and realizing that even these parts were once strategies for survival. The awakened person doesn't become pure. They become honest. They no longer confuse repression with virtue. They understand that every human being, no matter how spiritual or rational, carries within them the same primal drives, the desire for love, the fear of death, the pull of aggression, the longing for fusion. To see this clearly is both terrifying and liberating. Freud warned that too much awareness without integration can lead to despair. That's why awakening must be accompanied by compassion. Without compassion, the awakened I becomes cruel. It judges, isolates, and condemns. But when you realize that everyone is doing their best to manage their own unconscious, judgment dissolves into empathy. You start seeing not enemies, but wounded children wearing adult masks. The world becomes a vast therapy room, chaotic, yes, but full of stories yearning to be heard. And yet, this new vision can be exhausting. You can no longer enjoy gossip, shallow entertainment, or meaningless goals. You crave depth, but the world often rewards the opposite. This is why awakened people often feel alienated. They no longer fit in the social scripts that once defined them. They become quiet observers, carrying invisible knowledge. Freud would say they have integrated part of their shadow, and in doing so, they have lost the innocence of repression. The awakened person may look normal from the outside. They go to work, they smile, they play their roles. But inside, there's an awareness that never sleeps. They see how desire shapes behavior, how fear drives ambition, how guilt hides behind morality. They see how families reproduce trauma across generations, how lovers repeat old dynamics, how societies disguise aggression as progress. It's both fascinating and painful, because once you see the mechanism, you can't believe the illusion anymore. But here lies the invitation of awakening, to remain open even after seeing, to continue loving even after understanding, to engage with life not as an actor lost in a play, but as a conscious participant who knows it's a play and still chooses to play. Freud himself, despite his realism, never lost his fascination with human beings. He knew that behind every defense lies a dream, Behind every symptom, a desire to live. Awareness, though painful, can lead to tenderness. In time, the loneliness of awakening softens. You begin to find others who also see. Conversations become deeper, silence is more meaningful. You realize that awakening is not about escaping the world, but about meeting it without illusion. It's about seeing both the beauty and the horror, the tenderness and the cruelty, and holding them in the same breath. If you've come this far in the video, you're probably one of those souls who can't go back to pretending. And that's something to honor, because awareness may hurt, but it also heals. It allows you to love without clinging, to lose without collapsing, to see without judging. Freud would call this maturity, the ability to tolerate reality. So let this be your reminder. Awakening is not about knowing everything. It's about daring to see what most refuse to see. The unconscious movements behind our choices, the fear beneath our strength, the longing behind our pride. And when you see these things, don't turn away. Look at them the way Freud looked at dreams, not as lies, but as messages. The unconscious does not speak in logic. It speaks in symbols, in slips of the tongue, in sudden tears you can't explain. When you start listening, your life becomes a dialogue with yourself. The world may not understand you. Some will say you've changed. Others will accuse you of being too intense, too quiet, too detached. Let them. What they call detachment is often clarity. What they call strangeness is simply depth. What they cannot see anymore is what you can no longer ignore. So keep walking, keep feeling, keep questioning. The path of awakening is not linear, and it's not easy, but it is real. And in a world obsessed with appearances, reality is the rarest form of love. If you felt something move inside you while listening to this, leave your thoughts below. Share what awakening has taken from you and what it has given in return. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Not for the sake of numbers, but because this journey is lighter when shared. Together we can make sense of what the awakened eye still dares to see. There is a strange quiet that follows awakening, the kind that settles deep in the bones. It's not peace, not exactly, but the absence of the constant inner noise that once filled your days. You begin to notice how often people speak just to fill that silence, how they rush to label their experiences so they don't have to feel them. Freud would have said that words are our way of taming chaos. When a child learns to speak, the wild ocean of instinct begins to take shape. Things that were once pure sensation now become manageable through language. But what happens when the words no longer comfort you? When explanations fail? When you realize that naming something doesn't heal it? That's when awakening begins to reveal its second face, the confrontation with meaninglessness. Freud was not afraid of this void. He believed that maturity meant learning to live without illusions, without the promise of eternal happiness, without the guarantee of divine order. For him, the strength of the psyche was measured not by how happy one was, but by how well one could tolerate reality. And yet, to tolerate reality after awakening is a monumental task. You see the impermanence of everything, love, beauty, even your own identity. You realize that every attachment contains within it the seed of loss. What once seemed stable now appears fragile, and the very self you used to defend starts dissolving into something larger and more uncertain. This dissolution can feel like death, and in a way it is, the death of the constructed self, the ego that believed it was in control. Freud described this as the confrontation with the drives, the raw forces of life and death that move within us. Eros and Thanatos. Eros, the impulse to connect, to love, to create, and Thanatos, the impulse to withdraw, to destroy, to rest in nothingness. The awakened person feels both with greater intensity. You love more deeply, but you also see the futility of clinging. You long for life, but you also sense the calm of surrender. In this tension between Eros and Thanatos, something sacred emerges, not in the religious sense, but in the profoundly human one. You begin to see that life's meaning is not something you find, but something you create moment by moment. When the illusions of permanence and perfection fall away, what remains is the raw, trembling beauty of existence itself. Every breath becomes precious, every encounter fragile, every silence alive. But many people can't bear this nakedness. They rush to replace old illusions with new ones. A spiritual system, a self-help philosophy, a new identity as awakened. Freud would smile at this, perhaps with a touch of irony. He knew the human tendency to turn even insight into defense. The ego is cunning. It can hide behind enlightenment just as easily as behind ignorance. True awakening, however, is humbling. It doesn't make you superior, it makes you honest. You stop needing to prove, to preach, to fix others. You simply see, and in seeing, you understand. There is an image that often comes to me when thinking of Freud's view of consciousness. A candle flickering in a vast, dark room. The flame is our awareness, the darkness, the unconscious. Most of the room remains unseen, yet it shapes everything. The air we breathe, the echoes we hear, the shadows that dance on the walls. Awakening is not about lighting the whole room. It's about learning to walk with the candle, knowing the darkness is always there. The goal is not to eliminate the unconscious, but to befriend it. This friendship with the unconscious is not always gentle. The more you see, the more you realize how much of your life has been guided by forces beyond your control. You begin to recognize how you were drawn to certain people, not by chance, but by unconscious patterns replaying themselves. You see how you sabotaged love because intimacy reminded you of a wound you never healed. You see how you clung to suffering because it was familiar. And perhaps the hardest part, you see how you hurt others while trying to protect yourself. But awareness, even painful, is a form of redemption. The moment you can say, "I see what I was doing," something in you shifts. The unconscious loses a bit of its power, and freedom expands slightly. Freud never promised happiness, but he did promise clarity. And clarity, though it burns, brings dignity. Somewhere in this process, you realize that awakening doesn't mean escaping the human condition. You still feel anger, jealousy, longing, and fear, but they no longer possess you in the same way. You begin to notice them as movements of the psyche, not as truths about who you are. Freud described this as the difference between being driven and observing the drive. You start to feel space where before there was only compulsion. You can pause, you can choose, and that small space between impulse and action is where transformation lives. Awakening also changes how you love. Before, love might have been an unconscious transaction. You give affection to get validation. You attach to avoid loneliness. You idealize to escape reality. But now, you see love as a meeting of two complex psyches, both carrying their own ghosts. You stop demanding that the other person heal you or complete you. Instead, you hold them as they are, knowing that every relationship is a dance between two unconscious worlds. This kind of love is quieter, less dramatic, but infinitely more real. Freud might not have used the language of the soul, but he understood that love was the most profound form of knowledge. In his view, to love truly is to accept the other's complexity without illusion. And that's what awakened love becomes, a tender recognition of the other's humanity, their contradictions, their fears. It's no longer about possession or fusion, it's about presence. As the journey deepens, another paradox emerges. The more awake you become, the more you realize how limited awareness still is. Every insight opens another layer of mystery. The unconscious, like the cosmos, has no end. Freud compared dreams to the royal road to the unconscious, but he also knew that no analysis ever fully ends. We are forever creatures of partial knowledge. To awaken, then, is not to arrive, but to surrender to the endlessness of discovery. And maybe that's the final piece that awakening brings, not certainty, but intimacy with uncertainty. You stop needing answers and start cultivating curiosity. You learn to live with not knowing, and somehow that becomes enough. Because in not knowing, life remains alive. If you are still listening now, perhaps something in you recognizes this truth. Maybe you've walked through the ruins of your own illusions, and you're learning to breathe again in the open air of awareness. If so, know this: you're not broken, you're becoming. The pain you feel is the psyche reorganizing itself around truth. And though it may hurt now, it's leading you toward a quieter kind of joy, the joy of being real. Tell me, what has awakening taken from you, and what has it given back? Share it below, not just for me, but for everyone walking this same invisible road. There's something healing about naming your experience, about saying, yes, this is what it means to see. Because in the end, that's what awakening truly is. The moment you stop running from yourself. The moment you look into the mirror and instead of turning away, you whisper, I'm still here. Freud believed that all healing begins with the return of what was repressed. When you stop denying your truth, you begin to live again. Not as a persona, but as a whole being. And perhaps this is what awakened people cannot see anymore: the comfort of lies, the sweetness of denial, the innocence of unconscious living. They cannot unsee the patterns, the projections, the human struggle that hides behind every mask. But in losing that blindness, they gain something far greater: the capacity to love reality as it is, without needing it to be otherwise. So, to you who have awakened, be gentle. The light is harsh at first, but your eyes will adjust. Learn to walk with awareness the way one walks under the moon, slowly, softly, with reverence for the shadows that still accompany you. Because in those shadows lies the rest of your story, waiting to be told. And if this message touched something in you, if it reminded you that awareness and tenderness can coexist, subscribe. Not because I ask you to, but because this space exists for those who see too much, feel too deeply, and yet still choose love. Together, we can keep exploring what awakened eyes can no longer look away from: the living mystery of being human. There comes a moment in every deep awakening when you realize that even the act of seeing has its shadow. Awareness can become another defense, another way to avoid feeling. You dissect every emotion, analyze every reaction, name every pattern, and in doing so, you start to live more in the mind than in the heart. Freud warned of this danger. The intellect can become a new form of repression. To understand something is not the same as to experience it. The analyst, he said, must never forget to feel, and so must you. At this stage of awakening, life asks for a different kind of courage. Not the courage to see, but the courage to stay. To stay with what you see, to let it affect you, to let it hurt and soften you. Because awareness without feeling becomes sterile. Feeling without awareness becomes chaos. The awakened path is the marriage of both, the intellect illuminated by emotion, the emotion held by understanding. And here, Freud's concept of transference becomes a mirror for our daily lives. In analysis, transference happens when we project old feelings onto the therapist, reliving past relationships through them. But outside the therapy room, transference is everywhere. We see our parents in our lovers, our childhood fears in our bosses, our unmet needs in our friends. Awakening makes this visible. You begin to realize that much of what you call love or hate is actually memory-seeking resolution. The people who trigger you are not enemies. They are messengers, carrying echoes of your unfinished stories. When you see that, something profound shifts. You stop taking things so personally. The world becomes less about blame and more about revelation. Every encounter becomes an opportunity to integrate another piece of yourself. This doesn't mean you tolerate harm or deny boundaries. It means you see beyond the surface of conflict. You begin to notice that even the person who hurt you is acting from their own unconscious wounds. Freud once wrote that we are all more acted upon than acting. To awaken is to forgive, not out of naivety, but out of comprehension. Yet forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It transforms your relationship with it. Freud's idea of the return of the repressed teaches that what we push away always finds its way back, disguised in symptoms, dreams, or repetitions. Awakening, then, is not about escaping recurrence, but recognizing it. The same patterns may return, but now you see them as invitations instead of prisons. The moment you recognize a repetition, you've already begun to break it. Awareness turns compulsion into choice. And here lies one of the deepest gifts of awakening. You begin to live in dialogue with your unconscious. You stop demanding certainty from life and start listening to its symbols. You notice the small synchronicities, the dreams that seem to speak, the coincidences that feel like messages. This doesn't make you mystical, it makes you attentive. Freud himself, though skeptical of mysticism, understood the poetic language of the psyche. The unconscious doesn't use logic, it uses metaphor. When you start hearing its whispers, even suffering gains a kind of sacredness. Slowly, the fear of falling asleep again fades. You realize that awakening is not a permanent state, but a rhythm. You see, you forget, you remember again. The psyche, like the ocean, moves in tides. There are moments of clarity and moments of confusion, times when you feel illuminated and times when you drown in shadow. But each descent brings new material from the depths, and each return to light carries greater compassion. Freud called this process Durcharbeiten, working through. It's the endless labor of becoming conscious, and it never truly ends. In the end, perhaps awakening is not about transcending the human condition, but about embracing it fully. Freud didn't promise salvation, he offered honesty. And maybe honesty is the closest we can come to grace. To wake up is to see that you are both fragile and strong, both light and darkness, both the dreamer and the dream. You stop searching for perfection and begin to find beauty in imperfection. You stop running from pain and start to see pain as proof that you are alive. And this, I believe, is what awakened people cannot see anymore, the fantasy of escape. Once you've looked into your own depths, you know there is no final exit from the self, only deeper intimacy with it. You can no longer see salvation as somewhere else because you have glimpsed the truth. Everything you seek is already within you, waiting for your awareness to meet it. So as this reflection comes to an end, take a deep breath. Feel the weight of your own existence resting softly in your chest. You are not behind or ahead. You are simply here, awake in this moment, carrying both your light and your shadow. The world may never understand what you see now, but that's all right. Awakening was never meant to make you fit in, it was meant to make you whole. If these words have accompanied you somewhere deep, if they have touched the part of you that both longs and fears to feel, then leave a trace of that here. Write a few words in the comments, not as proof that you understood, but as a whisper of recognition. Maybe say, I see what I can no longer unsee, because when we name what we see, we make it real, and when we share it, we make it bearable. And if you wish to keep walking this path with me, to explore the hidden layers of the mind, to make peace with what lives in your unconscious, subscribe. Not out of routine, but as a way of saying yes to your own depth. This space will always welcome you, gently, without judgment, just as Freud believed healing should be, through presence, through truth, through the courage to look within. So walk softly now, awakened one. Carry your awareness like a quiet flame in the dark. Protect it, but don't let it harden you. Let it illuminate, but not blind. And remember, you have not lost the world. You have simply begun to see it as it truly is. And that, despite the pain, is a kind of love, too.